So let's go back to the big headline and try and go beyond it. Ladies and gentlemen, with Mangalyaan, India had revolutionized space exploration, showing that not only was it just possible for a second world developing country to explore space, it is possible at a fraction of the cost. Is it now time for a similar indigenous revolution in the AI sector? Well, India today took the first major step towards AI Atmanirbharta, with the government announcing plans to develop its own AI foundational model, which is very similar to ChatGPT, to Gemini and DeepSeek. Speaking at a press conference on India's AI mission, the Union Minister for Electronics and IT, Ashwini Vaishnav, confirmed that the country's large language model will be ready in just 10 months. Now, a common computing facility with 18,000 GPUs has been launched. Now, what are GPUs? GPUs are essentially the brains which power artificial intelligence. We all know what CPUs are. Think of GPUs as CPUs on steroids. So 18,000 of them will be available for startups, for researchers, for developers in the coming days. 10,000 of them are already available. Listen into what Vaishnav said.
Very happy to share with you that based on this common compute facility, the startups who wanted to develop foundational models will get the opportunity to develop India's own foundational models now, India's own LLMs and models which are foundational models, plus the models which are focused on particular sectors or particular applications or particular problem. So this will be a very big service to the country in the sense that many large problems can be solved. We are starting the call for, we started the call for proposals today, and with this we will start a series of discussions with the startups who want to, startups, IT services companies, the established companies, the academia, the researchers, to give their proposals for starting the foundational, for creating the foundational models.
So let's try and quickly break down what and give you a comprehensive picture. First, start with the what. What a Desi AI could mean. Number one, it could result in AI-powered affordable healthcare solutions. So healthcare is a key sector that will benefit. Then education, personalized multilingual education skill. Imagine if you would open any e-learning video and it could be automatically translated to any language. Then, when it comes to climate change, with the help of AI, you could predict climate change, you could predict weather patterns, you could save lives, you could save infrastructure, you can predict literally the future. Then there's agri-tech innovations, precision farming here, with maximizing the yield, minimizing wastage here, ensuring maximum output. And then boosting financial inclusion with the help of AI tools, and also strengthening national security, strengthening national governance. Now that is the what of AI-dependent model would be. Now the question is, why do we need it? Number one, what the last week has shown in the form of comparing ChatGPT to DeepSeek is that we need to avoid AI reliance on Western hegemony. That's been a focus which India has been highlighting, that it should not go by the US narrative. That narrative extends through AI platforms. It should then be shielded by geopolitical AI restrictions here in the form of censorship. It will prevent data control by foreign entities here. Why should our servers be pushed in a different country? It would develop AI for the local languages and dialects and community needs in India, making it a lot more accessible platform for India. And most importantly, it can counter China's censored AI. If you search Arunachal Pradesh on DeepSeek, it will not give you a response. And you will, therefore, we need an Atmanirbhar AI which ensures that it aligns with our national interests and with our national objectives here. Now, the problems. What I just said might sound familiar to you because the need to have an Atmanirbhar vocal for local tech in big tech has been before, but we have not worked on it. Remember Koo, it was supposed to be an alternative to Twitter. It's shut down. Then there was Indus app, which was supposed to be an alternative to Google's Play Store against Apple's ecosystem. That did not work as well. There was Bharat GPT. Now that was India's first actual GPT attempt, but it lacked the scale of computing adoption. Then there was Hype Messenger, which was supposed to be India's Desi version to WhatsApp. Does anyone ever use it? Takatak was supposed to be the replication of, to be our answer to TikTok when we banned TikTok. Instead, everyone just moved to Instagram. There was even a Namo app store. It failed to even attract developers here. So the problem is this entire made for India chorus is not something new. But the point is we have never been able to historically implement it beyond going behind basic jingoistic terms. And now I'm going to point out an aspect about AI which probably most people will not tell you to. Is it worth developing an AI model? Let's look at the calculations here. India has just bear with me for a second, let's keep this plate on. India has about 12,896 NVIDIA H100 GPUs. Each GPU takes 700 watts of electricity. That's 9.03 megawatts here. Let's roll the graphic plate here. The next, so these are just 12,900 NVIDIA H100s. It has 1480 NVIDIA H200 GPUs, which also takes 700 megawatts, 700 watts. That comes to 1.03 megawatts. And then third, it also has about a similar number of GPUs, 740 GPUs of AMD, that takes 0.44 megawatts. Now, if you add all three of them, of the 1500 GPUs, which Ashwini Vaishnav says is with us at this point, it comes down to 10.05 megawatts. Now you expand this and look at if these GPUs are working 24/7 a day, 365 days, what is the energy calculation? It comes to a whopping 91,980 megawatts an hour. That's the energy consumption. Where will that energy consumption come from in a country which is already dependent on fossil fuels? And to put that in context, 91,980 megawatts an hour is the energy consumption which is powering 85,000 Indian households a year. That is the amount of a hike in our energy bills we're looking at. So the question is two-folded. Can India become an AI superpower? But also, should it become an AI superpower? Is it worth it? Those are the questions I'm going to ask my panel of guests from all different aspects of this entire debate. Joining me, we have Pawan Duggal, India's foremost cybersecurity expert. We are also being joined by Venkat Lakshmi Narasimha, Executive Director of DIC Solutions and Sales, India and Middle East. We also have Rahul Bajaj, the CEO of Digital Darwin, Kanishk Agrawal, CTO Judge of Group India, and we have Vimlendu Jha, one of India's most noted environmentalists. Thank you all, gentlemen, for joining me on this very important show at this point here. Let me begin with Rahul Bajaj. Mr. Bajaj, what was your response when we heard the plans which were unveiled today by the technology minister at this point? What is your vision of what India's AI blueprint is likely to consist of?
Ritanshu, good evening, and thank you so much for having me on your show. So the question of should AI be something which India is gonna talk about Atmanirbharta in AI, and for that we need to have our own large language models. We need to have something which is coming out from India, which is very similar to, let's say, a DeepSeek or a ChatGPT, just because that is made in India. But what is really the purpose behind that, right? The basic thing for understanding is, are we trying to create some large language models just because we have certain kind of details in our culture that we want to capture that? Because large language models are data sets of knowledge. So are you creating that because you want to preserve knowledge, or you are trying to create something where India would want to show that it has arrived on the scene, and hence it wants to take up the Chinese and the American challenge, and hence look at a commercialization angle? Or it is just nationalistic jingoism? And if it is nationalistic jingoism, or if it is just to challenge other models, then I think it is too little too late. Because these large language models that are being created, now this is going to become very, very, this is turning into a very basic space where multiple use cases are to be written. If India is talking about getting into the AI race and becoming or creating those particular use cases of health, agriculture, which you were showing, then it is basically the way the large language models should be used, not rather creating your own. Because if you are doing that, then there is a lot of push that needs to be done, and constantly
So,
that needs to be done for
Mr.
creating those
Bajaj,
particular
if I've
models.
got your assessment right, and once again, it's my limitation, but it's also a limitation which a lot of our viewers will get, because I'm sure you're all experts in your field here, but the amount of jargon we put forward to viewers has to be a bit more controlled. So if I've got your viewpoint right, Mr. Bajaj, you're essentially saying that it's important to leverage existing AI models for the users, as we have mentioned, in terms of agriculture, in terms of health, in terms of healthcare, in terms of education, and so on. So that is a more worthwhile effort or direction to follow, rather than coming up with an own indigenous model just for the sake of bragging rights. Have I got your opening remarks correct?
That's absolutely right. Absolutely. And that is what something which India has done with
Okay. If
its UPI story, creating its own tech stack so that
yeah.
the digitization of financial transactions goes to the roots level, rather than creating something which just for the sake of saying that it is built in India, and hence and still it does not get used, is of no use. Rather, create an AI stack which
Okay.
can benefit all walks of life, and the utilization of AI is much more than any other nation.
Okay. So Pawan Dugal, come in on that. What Mr. Bajaj is saying, that we should utilize existing models of AI and indigenize them for our model, for our needs, rather than looking at developing our own models from ground up. But then when we look at the problems which DeepSeek pointed out at this point, it is a reflection of Chinese censorship, given the fact that if you search for Arunachal, if you search for critical things of what happened in Tiananmen Square to begin with, it comes up with, sorry, I can't tell you that information. And similarly, when it comes to platforms based in Silicon Valley, they may be a bit more transparent, but ultimately they're also written keeping in mind that of a Western centric or a Eurocentric view of the world. Is that then a problem if we look to indigenize platforms which are effectively written from other countries' needs and perspectives in mind? Not to mention data security.
Well, clearly, when you are coming up with this kind of large language model, you are starting the race when others have already reached certain milestones. Number two, your concerns are valid because you do not want your sovereignty, security, and integrity of India to be compromised. More so, when these AI agents are now being used by sovereign nations as also non-state actors for the purposes of targeting you, maybe your even sovereignty and security, apart from the data of your users. But a much bigger question arises for consideration. Now that you have made such a huge announcement with such pomp and vigor to the entire world, you're effectively giving an open invitation to all the cyber criminals and the cyber security breachers. Hey guys, come in and breach into our security. This is peculiarly important at a time when India does not have any dedicated law on cybersecurity. Our national cybersecurity policy of 2013 has been a mere paper tiger, and there's no effective legal framework in the country to regulate cybersecurity. So clearly the sovereign interests are understood, the strategic focus is well understood, but it would have been much more nicer if you would not have made a lot of noise about it and quietly dealt with it. It would definitely be nicer that Indians ought not to rely upon either Chinese or the Western models. But the fact is, does India want to reinvent the wheel? And if it wants to reinvent the wheel, in 10 months, it's going to be a completely new ball game altogether, with so much of advancements now taking place towards AI reasoners happening in. The AI agents is now history. AI reasoners are the flavor of the time. And by the end of the year, who knows, we could effectively be seeing the earlier precursors of superintelligence. So at a time when the world is already running at a speed of 200 miles an hour, ourselves starting a race with a speed of 20 or 30 miles an hour may not necessarily reap the right result. A better approach will be to say, how can we calibrate our approaches in this regard? Please understand, the country does not have the adequate infrastructure. Your figures yourself tell you that this is the kind of energy consumption, assuming this was to be done for one full year, it's going to have a big strain on the energy grid and the power grid of the country. So we'll have to look at all these factors put together, the cyber security of the foundational models, and how in these kind of given restrictions, India can best go ahead and protect its sovereign interests. The idea is wonderful. The will is fantastic. The only problem is with timing, and the only problem is now with yesterday Alibaba launching the QN 2.5 MAX, which is even more superior than Deep Sea. Then clearly we are obviously missing the message. The train has already left the platform, and we are now thinking of building our own train. I think we'll have to revisit our approaches. The objectives are wonderful, but we'll have to come up with new strategies to deal with these emerging new, challenging and changing ground realities with the passage of time.
Venkat, Lakshmi Narasimha, do you agree with, I mean, some would call it pessimistic, but a lot of people would call it the realistic stand which Mr. Diggal and Mr. Bajaj have pointed out, that instead of, as the metaphor which Mr. Duggal used, instead of declaring that you are now going to race at 20 kilometers when people are racing at 200 kilometers and have already had a head start, would a most sensible approach perhaps would have been what China did, develop its own AI platforms in secrecy for months, if not for years, and then spring them in one massive move, blitzkrieg on the Silicon Valley, and therefore completely take the US economy with surprise by what happened last week. Would a better approach would have been to use a bit more discretion before actually announcing that we are ready to walk when we have not even stood up yet?
Ritanshu, thanks for having me. Good evening, everyone. I really think that this is the time to actually, announce big, go big about this, and also to be able to engender an ecosystem of startups that would leverage an AI foundational model that's India specific. Allow me to give you a very specific example. We right now have built something for the farmers in Bihar where they speak in their native language, say Bhojpuri. We have to leverage a transition from the native language to English and then feed it into an LLM, a large language model. We're using ChatGPT in a secure environment in the cloud, and we're getting the response back. And we need to fine-tune the whole thing for a 6-second relay. We are putting in infrastructure. We're building our own infrastructure in this. We are leveraging open source, models and speech reduction techniques from the West. Why can't we have this built on our own? Just take out the speech reduction model. Just build a large language model that's specific to India, built in India, used in India. So I think providing the infrastructure, providing the ecosystem for us to build our own LLMs for India is really the need for the hour. I just gave you one example in agri-tech where we're helping farmers. I could give you tons of other examples in healthcare. So I really think that beyond the considerations of cybersecurity, which is valid for any foundational model, any cloud computing that we would set up, beyond aspersions of whether it is a message to the world, I think we really have a need for building this AI foundation. We really have a need in our country to use this and not to rely on.
Okay, so let's talk about the specific examples. Venkat, let's talk about the specific examples here, because that is where perhaps the point which Mr. Bajaj pointed out also comes in. You are saying that with this specific case study you mentioned of having to work in Bihar, for instance, would it have been easier for you to adapt existing AI platforms such as ChatGPT for the local language, or would you feel that it would have been far easier if we had our own indigenized local language model, large language models, which understands the complexities of Indian languages and does not have to be customized? Which would have been the easier approach for you?
We need something very custom for the Indic languages. Allow me to give you an example. ChatGPT has been trained with only 65,000 hours of Bhojpuri as a language. Whereas on English, they probably have hundreds of thousands of hours, recorded and translated and all that. So it doesn't natively understand the language. We need an LLM that works for us, for all of the languages that we support. That's just one example of why we should build something on our own. And talk about image detection and pest detection.
Ranjit, would you like to comment on that?
Because something that works for us.
Okay. Ranjit, would you like to comment on that? Because what Mr. Venkat is pointing out is quite different to what your own stand for. So do you now feel convinced by the need to have our own indigenous model? I'm sorry. My apologies. Sorry, Rahul Bajaj. So sorry. Please go on, Rahul.
Oh, thank you so much. So, no, I think the concept of large language models or these particular models that we are talking about, it's about how much knowledge worldwide we are putting. What Venkat was saying, if there are certain specific use cases, you can always look at creating smaller models which are specific to those use cases, right? Which are called small language models. If those particular things are required,
Yeah.
then the language translators, etc., are a separate set of technologies. Of course, there is the knowledge base on which these particular models are created are much more in English. They do not have India specific understanding of certain areas. But when you're talking about agriculture, when you're talking about health, 80 to 90% of the medical knowledge would be the same worldwide. The way agriculture is done would be the same. Yes, soil conditions could be different. Now you can still have fine-tuned
Okay.
those particular the bigger models into what you would want to use. My only statement here would be that instead of starting and working on these particular models from grounds up, you can leverage them. You can use that same dollar to
Okay.
have a longer mile as compared to doing something which is already done. What Mr. Dugal was saying. So this effort may turn to be too little, too late when others are already much ahead of us. Instead, use it and probably change the lives in a better way and use that particular fund in translating the same
Fair
AI
enough.
technology into much better use cases.
Fair enough, Rahul. Once again, apologies for the slip of tongue and getting your name wrong. Wasn't ill-intentioned in any way. But thanks for keeping that point out. Kanish Agarwal has been waiting quite patiently, and after that, I'll go to Vimlendu as well. Kanish, the other point which I came across while I was researching for this debate is that is the criticism that is very easy to level is that this is often a sentiment born out of jingoism or the desire to stay relevant in the news when there is a concept, there's a new technology which comes in the news cycle. And this need to go vocal for local, while many will believe is good intention, we have not seen it work at this point. Coup, for instance, is a very good example. At that point, we all felt that, we should have our data servers in our own country. We should not be reliant on other countries and their morals or their values of censorship. It's important to have a platform for India which represents India. After the initial fanfare, it failed out. And similarly, we have tried to come up with alternatives to TikTok, alternatives to Play Store, alternatives to all other platforms. We have not failed. We have failed at this point. Isn't that perhaps a warning as to before embarking on a massive project in terms of infrastructure, in terms of money, in terms of energy needs, on which I'll touch upon later, given the fact that we have not been able to come up with any viable indigenous alternatives to big tech so far?
Yeah, I believe, first of all, I think this announcement is a genius move. Why? From data privacy and data governance perspective, right? It's more around accessibility, that, the model is getting accessible by the medium class, the people that are not from the technology, and then they use their data. So this data is accessible, DeepSeek. It's accessible, obviously, to the Chinese government, or this on China data servers, right? Similarly, if you are training using ChatGPT or other, right, even if you're using a private instance, right, the data
Yeah.
is stored where? That's stored in US and other regions, right? So it is very important to build an ingrown. So let's not look at this AI as an alternative to ChatGPT or DeepSeek. I think it's very important for us to have our own AI model, and we are definitely that we have diverse and rich data sources available with us. So when it comes to India, right, from a linguistic perspective and cultural diversity perspective, And look at the large data sources we have in terms of data, right? We have the Digital India Initiative, we have Aadhaar, we have UPI, right? So these data models can be made and they can be made inclusive. The initiatives that some of the panelists were talking about, like domain-specific LLMs, let me tell you, from an agricultural perspective, Indian Council of Agricultural Research did made a lot of AI models that allows to identify that crops are sick or not, right? But when it comes to inclusivity, right, the mass usage, it gets limited. So if some initiative is backed by the government, they are funding it, and then they are inviting it, announcing other people to come become a part of it, the academia, the industry, the startups, and everything. It will really thrive the industry forward. And it is very important to have our own AI model. So that's what I believe.
Okay, so you're saying that the benefits are there, even though, I mean, there are concerns, but yes, there are several benefits of having our own AI model. Then let me come across the aspect of environmental impact. Vimlendu Jha, you are perhaps better suited than anyone else to take us through it. In my introduction, I touched upon the energy requirements that a system of 15,000 GPUs will require. What a lot of people don't realize when they use AI is that in the amount of effort it requires for AI to even come up with a response as to what is Chat GPT, there's electricity being used, which is massive compared to a regular, almost comparable to what a normal house uses. There's water being wasted because that water is used to cool down the servers. There is a carbon footprint which comes out, which is comparable to that of vehicles at this point, and we have those comparisons as well. The point is, a country like the United States can afford to do this because it outsources most of its energy carbon footprints to other developing countries. China has a very opaque policy anyway. Can India afford to foot the energy bill and deal with the environmental consequences of a massive AI model? Vimlendo, I think your audio is muted, so if you could please unmute yourself.
Sorry. So, Ritangshu, what I was talking about, that we tend to pretend that we are a first world country. Reality is that there are a lot of issues that we actually have in our country, be it social, economic, or ecologic in that sense. Right now, indeed, there's a reason why America wears clothes made in Vietnam, made in America, made in Bangladesh, or here and there. Right now, when we talk vis-a-vis AI, the environmental impact of AI, and there's a Vikas Singh committee report, there are many reports that have actually come, which talks about that the energy that is required to produce or to take care of the servers, and not just the AI servers. Before that also, we were actually talking about Meta and other servers. It's huge. Right now, a country like India, which is actually almost, we have a net zero commitment to make. By 2030, we were supposed to bring it down by 50%. By 2075, we were supposed to be net zero, so on and so forth. There is a huge environmental cost that is required. When I say environmental cost, that's also social and economic cost. By the way, most of the people that are there on your panel, they're largely entrepreneurs, where they look at it very selectively when they look at it from a business point of view, larger than looking at it from a social and economic point of view. Indeed, as in, better than Chat GPT could be DeepSeek, better than DeepSeek could be someone else, and better than that could be Vaishnav's version of Chat GPT. But even to understand that as a country like India, where we have a stampede happening here and there, when we have a Yamuna's ammonia level reaching 17 and 13, where there's no water and there's no air, where there's a crisis of another level. Right now we are arguing, and this is a very disproportionate kind of an argument or a show for a country like India, where we're struggling with basic issues altogether. No doubt the startups or the startup founders, the proponents of businesses are actually, giving grand shows and talking about why India is ready or not so ready about AI. And I'm not even talking about the larger United Nations Environment Program report that talks about a 2 kilogram of an AI computer needs 800 kilogram, worth of raw material to be made, or the amount of water that is needed to really cool off an AI processor, or the raw material that is used, that is needed. I'm not even getting to that. Right now, for a country like India, very, very, people who are only looking at their margins going 20-fold up, and unfortunately, your panelist, I should say so, they're only worried about how their businesses grow, and India's larger image grows versus what is the real quality of life in India and what is the real state of affairs in India. Any state for that matter, be it Bangalore, Mumbai, Delhi, Mumbai, look at the state of environmental affairs. So we can talk about dollars and money and this and that, and everyone could smile and wear their suit and smile. But reality is that is India really ready for yet another environmental challenge that could be put forth to put servers worth whatever megatons that we're talking about? Or we need to look at many other things. So, of course, I'm not an AI expert. Of course, I could use ChatGPT or a DeepSeek or made in Indonesia.
I
or for that
completely
matter, made in
understand.
Pakistan. And then Vikas
I completely
Singh
understand,
committee
Mr.
report talks
Jha,
about
because which
that
is why when I
India
reached out to
ready
my...
for something like that? The kind of challenge, like economic challenge, yes, but environmental challenge also, we need to consider.
Absolutely. Now, Vimlendo, in the defense of my other co-panelists, they were here in their capacities of their experts here, which is why it was very important for me to have someone who understands the impact on the environment and ecology as well, which is why when I reached out to my guest team to connect you, the first response was like, why is an environmentalist required for a debate on AI? And that is the problem here. The purpose behind this debate is to also tell people that there is a hidden aspect to jumping onto this AI bandwagon which people do not realize. And do you think that is a concern, Vimlendu, which also needs to be taken into account with the government, that we are all becoming cheerleaders? Nay, we want our own AI, we want a Desi AI. That has its own merits and demerits on its side. But there are concerns also about AI. It's sometimes better not to jump onto the developmental bandwagon.
Absolutely, Tangshu. Sometimes you could be the recipient of a service rather than the provider of the service. We need to understand that at the end of the day, if there's someone who's already taking the brunt, as you said, China is opaque. I'm not saying, by the way, in the global era, when you talk about it in the climate change era, if a climate disaster happens in China or in America, doesn't matter whether AI servers are put in India, Indian Ocean, or in Pacific Ocean, for that matter, right? It all is going to eventually affect all of us, as if you're looking at that kind of a consumption pattern. But right now, we need to really look at prioritizing for our tech minister and a communication minister and our IT minister to really understand what is our priority. Indeed, AI, of course, as we said, energy for that matter, electricity as a fundamental of energy really is solving our health and education problems. AI is solving climate problems as well. But how far do we need to go? Are we ready for it? How far do we want to, just because it really serves the purpose of economic interest, do we really want to jump into that? Because we have priorities. We still need to understand and accept that we are a third world country with 50% of Delhi living in slums. And therefore, to really talk about on prime time that we are going to be the AI leaders of the world is slightly pretentious. And Vikas Singh committee report you should all read.
Okay. Vimlendu, thank you so much for putting that point over. I'm sure all my panelists also agree with the need for balancing these aspirations. I'm quickly going to go across and get final comments at this point from two people I feel who have not given enough space at this point. Mr. Duggal, if you could respond to what Kanish was saying before I went to Vimlendu Jha, the argument again coming back to the need for having a local version of AI versus indigenous versus adapted version of a derivative of a foreign construct. What makes better sense security-wise? I understand India still has to make leaps and bounds when it comes to data security and data privacy, but isn't the fundamental step one to that having data servers within our own territorial boundaries?
Clearly, data localization is something that's going to benefit India tremendously if it wants to safeguard its interest. But please understand, we are seeing those U-turns and lopsided approaches happening. First, the data protection law had provisions on data localization. The DPDP Act passed in 2023 said not necessarily the government can actually allow you to export Indian data outside India. But now under the draft rules, under the DPDP Act, they have still brought in the element of data localization. So data localization is going to be important. Why? Because you are the biggest, most populous nation in the world, the biggest democracy. And if your data continues to be within your territorial boundaries, you'll be fine. You'll be able to dictate terms. But then when you're going to make your data going across the different parts of the world, it will be problematic. But please understand, we do not have the adequate wherewithal within the country to protect the data in terms of cyber security. And most of the people are taking artificial intelligence to be the absolute sacred element which cannot be breached. It's going to be breached left, right, and center. Already on the darknet, you have cybercrime as a service powered by artificial intelligence. And I don't really rule out the possibility where cybercrime as a service powered by artificial intelligence is going to be targeted on the AI systems or the LLMs that India is going to potentially make. Well, a lot of countries don't want India to succeed. So a large chunk of our strategy has to be that we don't need to be demonstrating whatever we are saying in pomp and show. Let's do things quietly. Let our work speak for its own self, and then also start on strengthening our legal systems, our security protocols, because ultimately this LLM that India is going to prepare will be India's crown jewel. Are we in an adequate position to go ahead and even protect the crown jewel at the time when we are making the crown jewel? And if the crown jewel gets made within 10 months, whether we will be in a position to keep on securing that? That's a fundamental question that will have to be addressed with the passage of time.
Okay. There are a lot of criticisms. There's a lot of cynicism, if I say, and I will say well-meaned and well-grounded as well. But an optimistic person can also say that there was a lot of these similar questions were also raised when it came to develop a space program here, and we have seen the benefits of that as well. Ganesh Agarwal, I'll leave the last word with you. At the end of the day, technology, and I would say even artificial intelligence, is inevitable here. We all have to learn to live with it, and we all have to figure out how best and most safest way to use with it. Now that we have heard the questions and concerns and the red flags that have been flagged up at all people, what would be your assessment of the best and possibly most sustainable, in all ways, sustainable blueprint to go with in the next chapter of India's AI adoption?
See, the world is not waiting for India to catch up in AI, right? So to differentiate ourselves, we have to focus on efficiency, definitely. My friend was talking about sustainability, so definitely sustainable AI models. Energy sources are there, natural sources are there. From the world perspective, we are the fifth largest power when it comes to solar power generation, right? So utilizing those energy sources, using high quality data set, and then focusing on first local implementation, that is identifying use cases that can be implemented in the healthcare space, in the agri-tech space, and other space, and drive inclusivity. So that will ensure that this doesn't become just a national pride. It is about controlling our future. So how we can control our future is something that we will come to know in next 10 months. And let's hope for the best.
All right. On that note, let's leave it at that here. I think the one inevitable fact is that AI is something you can't avoid. And we saw the impact which AI had in a globalized situation in terms of the disruption it had on the US markets when China came up with it. It's up to us whether we will be disrupted or disrupted, but we can be disrupted in many other ways in terms of ecology, in terms of energy, in terms of data security, which is why it's very important to have a holistic viewpoint about it, not get swayed away by, yes, we have our own AI now, we are comparable to the rest of the world. Patriotism doesn't work when it comes to data privacy. Thank you all for joining me on this very important debate. Pawan Duggal, Venkat Lakshmi Narasimha, Rahul Bajaj, Kanishk Agarwal, and also Vimlendu Jha for the first and hope, and many conversations we'll have over the next 10 months as we charter India's AI footprint. It's time for a short commercial, but on the other side, we look and go beyond the headline. Another very key issue which has come up from the Uttarakhand Civil Code: do I need to have a license to get a live-in relationship? Stay tuned.